There are moments when the world stops spinning for a second, when headlines become heartbreak and questions become thunder in every living room. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, but sinks into it, heavy, cold, unexplainable. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning, one filled with routine, the hum of traffic, and the rhythm of a city just waking up. But in the space of a single heartbeat, that normalcy was shattered. The story we're about to explore isn't just about one man. It's about a nation that found itself staring into the unknown, wondering who could strike so boldly and why. What began as a morning of promise ended in sirens, and the search for answers has stretched across borders, boardrooms, and battlefields. As new statements emerge from national security insiders, yes, even Kash Patel himself, the narrative surrounding the assassination of Charlie Kirk is no longer confined to one city. It stretches outward, hinting at movements, meetings, and possible foreign interests that investigators still refuse to fully explain. There's a sense that what we know is only a fraction of what lies beneath. And as the hours turned into days, one truth became clear. This was not random. This was methodical. Whoever planned it did so with precision, calm, calculation. If you believe truth still matters, stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because tonight we're piecing together what few dared to question. It started like any other morning. The sun barely up, a few early risers posting updates, the rhythm of a normal day. Then a single alert that ripped through every screen. Charlie Kirk has been shot. Within minutes, downtown went quiet. Streets closed, reporters shouted questions, camera flashes ricocheted off wet pavement. The air smelled of metal and confusion. Witnesses spoke in fragments. Some said a dark sedan sped away. Others swore they saw a lone figure waiting by the curb minutes before the incident. Between the chaos and the sirens, one truth echoed louder than all the noise. Whoever orchestrated this didn't act out of impulse. It was a message. The police promised transparency. They stood before the cameras, faces pale, voices steady, saying the public will be informed every step of the way. But that promise began to dissolve almost as soon as it was spoken. The first hours were filled with urgency, detectives collecting shell casings, drones scanning rooftops, security footage pulled from every nearby shop, a city trying to understand its own heartbeat. Then the tone changed. Files were sealed, statements postponed. A pattern of hesitation began to emerge. Those close to the investigation described the same atmosphere, tension mixed with restraint. Every time someone asked the wrong question, meetings got canceled. Every time a new clue surfaced, it disappeared behind a wall of bureaucracy. But even behind closed doors, pieces started aligning. Airport logs showed flights landing before dawn. Car rental receipts were traced to names that didn't exist. Traffic cam data revealed vehicles entering the area registered miles away in other states. Each discovery added another shadow to an already dark story. When analysts compiled communication data, they found chatter on encrypted networks, brief, coded exchanges, then sudden silence hours before the attack. At first, investigators thought it was unrelated. Then the timestamps began to match. That's when Kash Patel, a former intelligence official, gave his first public comment. He didn't point fingers. He didn't make accusations. He simply said, "Look deeper at who benefits when chaos strikes." It was one sentence, but it cracked open an entire narrative. People started asking, was this about ideology, revenge, or something much larger? Something that reached beyond the borders of the country itself? Within 48 hours, the quiet suburb where the incident occurred became the focus of an international discussion. Foreign analysts, independent journalists, and even private security contractors began dissecting every frame of footage, every police statement, every deviation from protocol. Then, quietly, another detail surfaced. Within 2 days of the shooting, several private jets departed a small regional airstrip. The flight plans were legitimate, but the timing raised eyebrows. Destinations included Central Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, locations tied more to diplomatic traffic than private travel. When journalists requested the passenger manifests, they were told those records were under national security review. Days later, the documents were reclassified. It was as if someone decided the public had learned just enough and no more. Television panels debated whether these flights were coincidences or cover stories. Online forums swelled with speculation. The official spokesperson maintained there was no credible evidence of external coordination. Yet, strangely, the silence from agencies that usually flood the media with updates became total. That silence began to speak louder than any statement could. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens lit candles in front of courthouse steps. They gathered at intersections holding handmade signs. We deserved the truth. It wasn't political. It was personal. A week later, Kash Patel returned to the public eye with a calm but loaded warning. His address was brief, no theatrics, no alarmism. He spoke about patterns, how external powers often exploit tragedy to sow distrust from within. Foreign influence, he said, doesn't always mean direct involvement. Sometimes it's the narrative that follows which does the damage. That phrase struck deep, because while investigators wrestled with evidence, the public was wrestling with perception. Was this case about one gunman, or the story the world was told to believe afterward? The more people looked, the more inconsistencies appeared. A piece of footage leaked from a nearby surveillance camera showed a flash of light milliseconds before the gunshot, a reflection, a misfire, or something edited later. Analysts disagreed. The clip was quietly removed days later. Another report suggested that one of the vehicles seen leaving the scene matched the plate number of a car registered to a security contractor firm once linked to overseas training operations. When questioned, the company declined to comment. Rumors became headlines, headlines became retractions, and retractions became whispers. Each turn blurred the line between fact and narrative. Inside the investigation, tension grew. Sources described disagreement among agencies, some arguing for transparency, others insisting on containment. A senior investigator was quietly reassigned, another resigned without explanation. Through it all, the question lingered: who gains from confusion? Because sometimes the truth isn't buried, it's drowned in noise. Public trust began to fracture. For every official statement, there were 10 counterclaims. Some insisted it was a lone actor, driven by ideology. Others saw signs of coordination, a precision too clean for randomness. Meanwhile, families close to the case pleaded for answers. Candlelight vigils turned into nightly gatherings. People sang, prayed, and demanded accountability. They weren't conspiracy theorists. They were citizens tired of silence. Foreign news outlets picked up the story, each framing it differently. Some called it a domestic tragedy, others hinted at political motivation. One European paper described it as a warning sign of cross-border influence operations. The line between reporting and propaganda thinned overnight. By the 10th day, the emotional weight was unbearable. The city that once thrived on conversation now spoke in whispers. Coffee shops played news at low volume. Journalists guarded sources like state secrets. And still, somewhere behind the noise, those who knew the deeper threads stayed quiet. Kash Patel's warning continued echoing in interviews and editorials. His phrase about the narrative doing the damage became the defining quote of the crisis. It wasn't what he said, it was what he implied, that someone, somewhere, was shaping the story the public consumed.
When we piece these fragments together, the conflicting statements, the classified files, the subtle shifts in official tone, it forms a mosaic not of clarity, but of careful control. Every answer arrives late. Every fact comes half-wrapped in red tape. The tragedy that began with a single shot had become a mirror reflecting the entire machinery of power, perception, and secrecy. And as the weeks passed, something else became clear. The case wasn't closing, it was expanding. Each new rumor, each leak, each exclusive tip only deepened the fog. The week after Patel's remarks, the story took a new turn. A set of leaked emails appeared online, brief, cryptic, unsigned. Each referenced consultations, media narratives, and one chilling phrase repeated across several threads: stabilize perception before exposure. No source was confirmed, investigators refused to authenticate them, and cybersecurity teams warned that some of the files could have been altered. Yet their timing reignited a question many tried to bury. Was someone shaping the way the world understood this tragedy? Officials downplayed the leaks, calling them speculative noise. But privately, staff inside several agencies admitted that information warfare was now part of every investigation. They weren't just tracing who pulled a trigger, they were tracing who pulled the strings of conversation itself. At this point, attention turned to digital footprints. A cybersecurity unit discovered patterns of posts and bot activity that surged within minutes of the first news alert. Dozens of accounts, registered from overseas domains, began spreading conflicting stories, each one designed to confuse rather than clarify. One claimed the suspect had fled across the border. Another insisted it was a government cover-up. Every version contradicted the last. Within hours, truth and rumor were indistinguishable. Analysts called it information fog. One expert described it simply: the goal isn't to convince you, it's to exhaust you. And it worked. People stopped arguing facts and started defending feelings. Public confidence wavered, and in that uncertainty, real leads began to slip away. Behind the scenes, detectives kept pursuing evidence. Security footage from a nearby office tower revealed a figure leaving the scene just minutes before the attack. The person's identity remained unconfirmed. No clear face, only the silhouette of a coat and a steady stride into the rain. When investigators requested higher resolution data from a satellite feed that had captured the same area, they were told the imagery had been automatically purged under privacy protocols. Another dead end. The frustration grew so intense that one senior officer reportedly requested an external audit of the investigation's digital chain of custody. That request was denied, pending review. The denial leaked within days, feeding even more speculation that something larger was being protected. By the second week, journalists were piecing together a timeline of contacts between lobbyists, consultants, and foreign policy advisors who happened to be in the same city in the days leading up to the event. No one suggested conspiracy, but the clustering was unusual enough to draw headlines. A former intelligence analyst, speaking on background, said, "Sometimes influence doesn't arrive in briefcases or cash. It arrives as conversation, in rooms where decisions are made to look like chance." Those words stayed with everyone watching. If true, it meant the story wasn't only about a gunman. It was about access, timing, and the invisible tug of interest that moves through every layer of power. As the noise reached fever pitch, Patel appeared again, this time before a bipartisan committee. Calm, composed, he repeated what he'd said earlier, that the real danger was not one act of violence, but the architecture of confusion built around it. He urged lawmakers to separate evidence from narrative and narrative from manipulation. When asked directly whether he believed foreign assets had any role, he paused, then replied carefully, "We should never underestimate how information travels." That sentence, vague yet heavy, became the headline of the night. In the public square, protests and vigils blurred together. Some demanded transparency, others called for restraint. At the candlelight vigil held downtown, thousands stood shoulder to shoulder under a cold wind. No one spoke for long. They simply held their candles high, the small flames reflecting in puddles along the street where everything had begun. It was as if the city itself was breathing quietly, waiting for an answer that never came. During that vigil, a projection lit up a nearby building, an enormous image of a single word: truth. No slogans, no logos, just that word in stark white light. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Maybe that's all we have left." Weeks passed, and focus shifted toward legislative hearings. Committees debated whether communication platforms should be required to preserve all metadata during major incidents. Civil rights advocates warned against surveillance overreach. Investigators argued that it was the only way to prevent digital interference. Each side claimed to defend the same principle: public trust. But the debates themselves showed how fragile that trust had become. Then came an unexpected revelation. A whistleblower, anonymous but verified through legal counsel, submitted an affidavit stating that data packets from a foreign ISP had indeed interacted with domestic servers handling real-time updates during the morning of the attack. The packets were small, the source unclear, but they existed. It wasn't proof of control or coordination, only proof of contact. And that was enough to reignite the storm. For investigators, this meant reopening lines of inquiry once considered closed. For the public, it meant another wave of headlines and speculation. And for those seeking closure, it meant starting over. Patel's office released one final statement. "We may never fully know what was deliberate and what was coincidence, but the duty of a free society is to keep asking." That message reframed the entire conversation. Instead of chasing villains, it challenged everyone to examine systems, how stories spread, how emotions are weaponized, how silence becomes strategy. In the weeks that followed, agencies quietly increased cooperation on cyber defense. New protocols were drafted to monitor online manipulation without infringing on personal rights. No one claimed a victory, no one claimed defeat. The investigation simply evolved, from searching for one person to understanding how information itself can be used as a weapon. Through it all, the community refused to forget. Murals appeared across city walls, paintings of candles, of open hands, of the phrase, "Never stop asking." It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about memory. Each image reminded passersby that behind the headlines were real lives, and behind those lives, questions that still deserved light. Even now, every few weeks, another small detail surfaces. A timestamp corrected, a file declassified, a quote clarified. None of it changes the core mystery, but together it builds something quieter and perhaps more enduring. Awareness. Awareness that information can heal or harm depending on who holds it and how they use it. Awareness that foreign influence doesn't always arrive through agents or money. It can arrive through distraction, division, or doubt. And awareness that truth, while slow, still moves. As the documentary ends and the final images fade, one line remains on screen. Some answers live in documents, others live in courage. If you've followed the story this far, it means you care about both. So take a second to like this video, share it with someone who values truth, and subscribe for updates as new details emerge. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what truth means to you, because sometimes that simple act of asking is how light begins to return.